So here's my disclaimer for the week. You're really going to hate this sermon. Now, I know some of you are probably like, Garrison, we hate your sermons every week, but touche. I guess you're just in for a double portion this week. Sorry, maybe not sorry. But this is one of those sermons that, if we're honest, I think the reason that we hate it is because we know it to be true. We just don't want it to be true. Deep down in our soul, we realize that, this is true for us. We just don't want it to be true. So for the next few moments, I want us to explore this idea, this uncomfortable, this unwanted, undesired, but undeniable connection that we see in the scriptures, this connection between our sacrifice and the kingdom's progress. So the big idea for today is that there is this connection between our sacrifice and the kingdom's progress, both in us, through us, and around us, in ways that I think if we're truly honest, we know to be true. We just don't want them to be true. A lot of times we try to deny it, or we'll try to avoid it, or we'll numb ourselves from the reality of it, or we'll try to lift ourselves above it with Christian platitudes. But that doesn't make it any less true. I think the complexity of life, it brings us to recognizing this reality, that there is a connection between our sacrifice and the progress of the kingdom. This is a connection that you see throughout all of the scriptures. You see it in the Old Testament, you see it in the New Testament. But most importantly, we see Jesus embracing this. And I wanted, before we dive into our passage for today, I thought it would be important for us to kind of see Jesus embracing this reality and seeing him live it out. And this isn't an extensive list of moments where Jesus is connecting the dots for us, but I thought it'd be nice to just get an idea with a couple instances. So first we see this in Jesus' teaching. For example, there's this moment in John 12, starting in verse 24, where he uses a parable to explain this connection in relation to his life. He says, unless a seed falls into the ground and dies, it will never grow into something that bears fruit. There's this connection between our sacrifice and the progress of the kingdom. So we see this in his teaching, but we also see this in just his life, right? In his ministry. Think about the incarnation. Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus was in glory, and he came and moved into our own cul-de-sac. He sacrificed to step into life with us. Think about the cross, his crucifixion. Jesus is hanging on a cross that was made from a tree that he created, and there's a soldier, there's a Roman centurion standing next to him, and he's seeing the lifeblood spill from Jesus. And this man says, surely this man was the Son of God. There was something about the way that Jesus died that opened up the door for the progress of the kingdom in that man's soul. We see this in his teaching, and we see this in his life, in his ministry, but we also see this in his invitation to us as his followers, right? In Mark 8, there's this moment where Jesus approaches a crowd, he draws the crowd to him, and he begins to explain something to them that's undesirable, unwanted, but unavoidable in the kingdom of God. He says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. He says, if you want to follow me, take up your cross. Jesus does not use the typical word for life here, lose your life, save your life. He doesn't use the word zoe. He uses the word psyche, which is where we get our word psychology from. So in other words, Jesus is saying, if you want to experience this brand new way of life, you have to die to your worldview of what it means to be alive. In other words, sometimes the way forward feels like the way backwards. And if we want to experience the fullness of life that God has for us, we need to embrace this connection between our sacrifice and the progress of the kingdom, or we will never experience the flourishing of the kingdom. This passage in Mark 8, or this idea of picking up your cross and following Jesus, we've heard it before, right? Like, we've heard messages on it. We've heard people preach about picking up your cross. We've read books. We're very familiar with the phrase, take up your cross and follow me. It's the classic thing. Sometimes we'll put it on poster boards and hold them at basketball games. You'll see that in John 3:16. You'll see this knitted into your grandma's quilt. I mean, it's everywhere. But I think because of this, it's lost its weight. We've become desensitized to this phrase to a certain extent. And so in order for us to fully grasp the concept of taking up our cross, I thought it would be helpful for us to step into a specific instance where we see Jesus talking to a particular person in a particular moment and encouraging them to lean into this call. So we're going to be in John 21, verse 15 through 19. So you can go ahead and open your Bibles to that passage, John 21. This is what begins to unfold in the end of the book of John in a conversation between Jesus and Peter. So we will start in verse 15. When they had finished eating breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to them, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And then he said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Tend my sheep." And then he said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved when he said this to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you were old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, Jesus said to him, "Follow me." In this moment, we find the disciples eating breakfast with the resurrected Savior. Imagine this moment with me. Imagine how ridiculous this moment would have felt to the disciples. Like, the resurrected Jesus is walking up to the shoreline. They're out fishing. Jesus calls to the disciples. He disrupts their regularly scheduled program. And then once they realize it's Jesus, Peter dives into the water, swims 100 yards back to shore. They follow in the boat after Peter, and they're standing there looking at the man that they saw die, buried. And he's standing there right in front of them. And what does he want to do? The first thing this man wants to do is hang out on the beach and eat breakfast with them. Honestly, same. I love breakfast. Let's do that, Jesus. Verse 15, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter. So Jesus focuses in on Peter. He goes from the community to the individual. Don't miss this moment. John, in his book, would regularly use conversation and dialogue to explain something specific. So he's saying, I don't want you to miss something about this conversation. There's something important that I'm trying to tell you. So imagine this moment. Again, so we're back on the beach. It's morning, so it's cold. And so there's probably some sort of fire burning. They're around the fire, and they've probably got lots of questions. There's a lot of emotions going on. There's hugging. There's joy. So there's lots of talking happening. And then Jesus turns to Peter, and he starts to talk to him. He doesn't pull him aside. He speaks to them in the midst, or he speaks to him in the midst of his friends. And he says, do you love me? I mean, this has got to be a little awkward. How might God be moving from speaking to us as a community to speaking to you directly this morning? What does God want to say to you? I believe that if you let him, many of us in this room will hear clearly and directly from God this morning. Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, feed my lambs. And he said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, tend my sheep. And then he said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he had said this to him a third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. This language of sheep and lambs is regularly used by Jesus to explain the relationship between him and the people that were under his care. It's this image of Jesus as the good, loving, caring shepherd. And we are his sheep. And it seems as though that he's leading Peter and calling Peter into this kind of relationship. That he's actually calling Peter into this kind of role. He says, tend my sheep. Peter, I want you to take care of my people. And so Jesus asked this question 3 times. Do you love me? Do you love me? Oh, and by the way, Peter is probably still a little wet from his 100-yard dash back to shore. I mean, or dash, why? That doesn't make sense. It was a breaststroke. So, he was swimming. He's wet. It's cold. It's the morning. And so he's like, wait, do you love me? I just swam in the ocean for you, to get to you, Jesus. He asks it 3 times. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? This was to connect with the 3 times that Peter had denied Jesus earlier in the book of John. Mind you, 2 of those times were around a fire pit in front of a middle school girl. She said, you? He said, no. And then he started cussing her out, and it just didn't end well. So we have Peter sopping wet. We have him having cussed out a middle school girl, and he's gone back to his own old way of life. Like before he knew Jesus, he's fishing. And Jesus asks him, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? It's almost as if he's bringing Peter through this healing moment, this process of healing. But notice, Peter was grieved during this process. There is oftentimes a level of grief and hurt in the process of healing. Peter, in this specific moment, was right where Jesus wanted him. He wanted to heal some things in his heart, but there was still a grieving process. So often, the grace and the power of God is seen most and more vividly in our seasons of pain and healing than in our seasons of strength. The passage says, Peter was grieved because he had said this to him a 3rd time. Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know what I've done. You know what I've been through. You know everything. You know that I love you. This 3rd time, he says something different. He doesn't just say, you know that I love you. Peter in this moment is beginning to recognize Jesus' sovereignty over the situation, that he is in complete control. Lord, you know everything. You know what I've done. Sometimes the pain of healing pushes us into places that we would rather not go. But the power and the grace of God is on display. Verse 18 and 19. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." Up until this point, Jesus has brought Peter through moments of disruption. Remember, fishing, now they're on the beach, and then now it's moments of correction and healing. And then Jesus speaks a reality into Peter's life that is very similar to the invitation that he presents to all of us in Mark 8. Jesus tells Peter that he will be a transformation agent for the sake of the kingdom, and it will ultimately lead to his death. This is a particular moment where Jesus is speaking prophetically into Peter's life, and he's saying that your devotion to me will end in the ultimate sacrifice. History tells us that Peter ends up dying on an upside-down cross. It's almost as if Jesus is looking directly into Peter's eyes and saying, "Listen to me, Peter. There is this connection between our sacrifice and the kingdom's progress. You are going to die for me, Peter. You will be led where you do not want to go." All right, so let's go. Jesus is saying the exact same thing to us. It will cost you your life. Now, for most of us, that will be a metaphorical life. But that doesn't make it any less true. That if we want to enter into the fullness of life that God has for us, we will embrace this uncomfortable connection between our sacrifice and the progress of the kingdom. That as a follower of Jesus, you will be led where you would rather not go. So let's unpack that phrase for a second. As a follower of Jesus, you will be led. Somebody else is in charge of your life. Jesus says, "Come follow me. Come follow after me. Go where I am going." We don't really like to hear this. I love to believe that I am in charge of my life. That when I grow old, I will be able to make my own decisions. I'll be able to go my own way, control my own destiny. But eventually, we get to this place where we realize that we're not in control. That no matter how hard we try, it won't always end up the way that we planned. We live in this obsessed culture where we're obsessed with self-help books and formulas. We love to optimize our day so that it helps us out in the rest of our lives. But eventually we realize that the formula that we have doesn't really pencil out. That we're actually not in control. But this is a good thing. Because once we realize that we're not in control, as followers of Jesus, we recognize that Christ is. That Jesus is in control, that you are under Jesus' care. There's freedom in this. So, 1, you will be led. 2, you will be led where you would rather not go. Remember, in our passage, Jesus looks at Peter and was prophetically speaking to the exact circumstances that Peter would experience as a result of following him. And then he says, "Follow me." He says, "Let's go." When God uses you, when you allow God to arrest all of your life, it always comes with a personal cost. When you take the step of faith to follow Jesus, you will pay a price greater than you could possibly imagine. There is this connection. Now, I know I sound like a broken record here, but I want to get the point across. There is this connection between our sacrifice and the progress of the kingdom that deep down we know is true. We just don't want it to be true. Sometimes we deny it. Sometimes we avoid it, or we'll try to numb ourselves from the reality of it, but that doesn't make it any less true. In the kingdom, you will be led where you do not want to go. Now, we've been hearing some incredible sermons over the past few months in our series in 1 Corinthians, but just for application, I want us to understand something. I want us to see how we can misapply truth that we are receiving and jerry-rig it to align with the way that we're already living our lives. So 1 Corinthians 12 through 14, let's just look at that for a little bit. As a summary, you are the body of Christ. We are called to contribute, to participate, and the Spirit gives us gifts to help build up the body. As the Spirit chooses, He manifests Himself through us for the purpose, in many different ways, for the purpose of building up the body in love. Now, here's how I think we could misapply this. We think that we can have all of that we can fully live into it, while still maintaining some sense of control over our lives without struggle or cost. We really don't like the sound of struggle or cost, do we? Struggle isn't safe. Cost isn't safe. Cost is costly. We like control, don't we? We like the facade of safety that control offers us. We live in a world of options. We have a lot of options, don't we? Options for our situations, our opportunities, or our resources, options for the way that we consume or the way that we spend our time. And with a desire to maintain control of our lives in a world that is thrusting an unlimited amount of options our way, sometimes control feels like leaving our options open. And safety looks like the freedom to retract at a moment's notice when it leads us where we do not want to go, or even if we just get a better offer. This is a serious epidemic in our Western church. We want to stand for something great. We want to fight for the oppressed. We want to make our lives count for something significant. We want to follow Jesus, but only on our own terms. We long to see transformation in our cities, in our homes, in our workplaces and schools, but only if it fits into our schedule. We want to be generous with our resources, but only if it fits into our budget. We aspire to live in community, but only on our own terms. We desire to serve the church, but only when it's convenient. There's a quote that I read not too long ago that seems to speak directly to this situation. Read this with me. It doesn't matter if it's a megachurch filled with programs or a missional house church. If those walking into your community see physical presence at your activities as a low priority, or if they lack the emotional resilience to receive gentle instruction, or find it normal to pull out of volunteer leadership tasks via text message with a half hour's notice, any church will struggle to function as growing numbers of people professing faith join their community. Now, as sobering as this is, it only speaks to the inner workings and programs of church. But honestly, if we can't get this right, do we really think that we'll be able to faithfully live this calling out in the rest of our everyday, ordinary lives? In this climate that we live in today, it is far too easy to think that we can live the Christian life while maintaining a sense of control over it as well. Please be careful. This ideology or framework for life could be infecting your life right now. It is not coherent with Christianity. It is toxic. In Mark 8, before Jesus calls the people and uses the phrase, take up your cross, he has a rather interesting conversation with Peter. Shocker, I know Peter is one of those guys that needs a lot of attention, just like us. Jesus tells his disciples that what he must do to accomplish his mission. It says that he talks to them plainly. I'm going to die on a cross, guys. And then Peter pulls him aside and says, whoa, Jesus, you've got the wrong script. Like, that's not the story here. There's no need for you to do that. Don't go down that road, Jesus. And Jesus responds to him by saying, get behind me, Satan. You are set on the things of man, not on the things of God. This is a really low moment in Peter's life. He goes from being the star pupil of the class to being a conduit of Satan. But I think that Jesus was trying to get something across to him here. Something extremely important. To reject the connection between sacrifice and the kingdom's progress. To live lives where you can follow Jesus on our own terms without cost. It's not only wrong, Jesus rejects it and calls it satanic. Our cultural comfort lies in our idolatry to the autonomous self. It grips the root of our worldview with a desire to maintain some sense of control over our lives. My fear is that though we come to church, though we connect in community groups throughout the week, though we hear sermons about living into the body and building up the church, though we hear sermons about being generous with our resources, though we sing songs about a God who is immeasurably more than we could ever imagine, my fear is that if we're not careful, we will replace our worship and devotion to Christ and his mission with the worship of control and options and devotion to low commitment and the autonomous self. Jesus says, follow me. What will you do with that invitation? How will you respond to this call? He says it with a loving heart. Do you love me? Do you love me? So I don't want to stand here and tell you that I know the full scope and breadth of what it means to sacrifice for the sake of the kingdom. There are people in this room that have sacrificed so much more than I could possibly imagine. There's people in this room that are giving generously in a way that's inconvenient. Maybe you're involved in the foster care system. And in a world where you see everyone optimizing their free time for their own agendas, you're watching your free time fade away like dust while you serve those who have been misplaced, overlooked, and abandoned. Some of us have been serving faithfully for years without skipping a beat. And it may feel small in the moment, but over time, incrementally, you're seeing the kingdom come to earth in powerful ways that have made a lasting impact. We could go on for hours and hours about the stories of sacrifice that are here in this room. But no matter where you find yourself in that story, isn't it true that we're all in need of a little bit of grace? I myself need a lot of grace in this subject. About a month and a half ago, there was someone who's connected to the church family that experienced a life-altering medical situation. And in the office on that Monday, in staff, we were talking about it and trying to figure out who was going to be able to rally a team together and go help her out on that weekend for a handful of hours. And there were quite a few people on staff that were going to be out of town, and I myself had some scheduling things that I really couldn't rearrange in that moment, that short of time, and so I didn't end up getting to go. But in full transparency, I was kind of relieved that I didn't have to go. Why? Because I didn't want to go. I didn't want to sacrifice my time. Have you ever been there? Where deep in our heart, we know that there is this connection between our sacrifice and the progress of the kingdom. But if we're honest with ourselves, we know that it's true, we just don't want it to be true. Sometimes we hide it, avoid it, run away from it, lift ourselves above it, but that doesn't make it any less true. In the kingdom, you will be led where you do not want to go. Progress, that maturity for a follower of Jesus, is being willing to be led where you do not want to go. So what do we do with this? How do we respond? I think there's a few things I want to show you that will help us build a posture towards this kind of message. So first, we do not fear the sacrifice. John 16:33 says, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have tribulation, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. There's a promise there. Like, you will have trouble. But there's a second promise as well. I have overcome the world. And that promise overshadows the first one of sacrifice. The reality is Christ has overcome the world, so our sacrifice is something that we do not have to fear. Jesus says this so that we may have peace. We do not fear the sacrifice. 2, we do not grow weary. If you feel like you're in the game, if you're running the race or whatever, like if you feel like you're in the story of sacrifice, you're in the thick of it, don't grow weary. I hope that a message like this affirms you that you're right where God wants you to be. Do not grow weary. Galatians 6:9, and let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap. Think about the seed again. If a seed does not fall into the ground and die, it cannot reproduce and multiply and flourish and bear fruit. Let us not grow weary, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. 3, we do not compare the sacrifice. In our passage, John 21, after Jesus finishes in verse 19, Peter then responds to this by taking it all in, thinking about what Jesus has said, turning back to the disciples, points out John and is like, what about him? Is he going to sacrifice too? How many of us do that? Like, think about this with me. You are going to die for me, Peter. What? Yep. What about John? We do this thing when we're in the midst of sacrifice where we start to compare and we start asking things like, well, what about him? And we start thinking about what's fair. And you'd think that Jesus would respond in this kind, caring manner like Jesus always does. But no, listen to what he says. He's kind of like, well, I mean, you're going to die on a cross, Peter, but John, he might live forever. But who cares? What is that to you? Like, you follow me. In the midst of sacrifice, sometimes we'll start to look around us to other people, but Jesus is saying, no, focus on me. Focus on me. You follow me. That's what's important. So we don't fear it. We don't grow weary of it. We don't compare the sacrifice. And then lastly, we embrace it. Hebrews 12:2. So Steve, next week, is going to be in Hebrews 12, so I just kind of want to give us a way to send us into next week. But Hebrews 12:2 says, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Read this moment with me again. It says, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. What joy! You mean to tell me that there was some kind of joy that Jesus had in the midst of his most agonizing moment here on earth? What joy? Was it the resurrection? No, that was a part of the program. Was it a perfect connection and union with God the Father? No, he already had that. It's you. You are his joy. when I read this moment, I imagine Jesus embracing his cross for you. Do you love me? Do you love me? I love you, Peter. Follow me. And so we look to Christ and we follow after him and we embrace our cross. We do not fear it. We do not grow weary of it. We do not compare it. And lastly, we embrace it. Jesus' last words to Peter were simply, follow me. He didn't give him a 5-step process for what that would look like. He didn't have tangible action points for how this would play out in Peter's life. He says, follow me. You are going to be led where you do not want to go, Peter. All right, so let's do this. He leaves it at that. Like, just follow me. And Peter had to sit with that in his gut. In light of this, my purpose for this message has not been to give you what it looks like to specifically live out this call in your life, in your particular situation, but simply to help you see the weight of this call and then invite you into it. So, if you wouldn't mind standing with me, standing to your feet if you were able, I want to speak a blessing over us this morning. And the band can come back up on stage. In light of what we've been talking about already, I want this to be a commissioning moment for us to feel like God is calling us into this season. During our time of communion, I want us to go before our Heavenly Father with great expectation that we will all hear from the heart of God, that we will be stirred by His Spirit to believe that Christ loves us. And because of His love, He's also calling us into a life with Him, a life that models His. That we will be stirred by His Spirit to do immeasurably more than we could ever think or imagine. That we could do with Him something that outlasts us. So, a word for Anthem Church. You were created for more. You were created by God for something eternal. And I believe that if you will let Him, God will speak directly and clearly to you and give you the faith to step out. Take that one next step in following Him, to recognize our call, to recognize the connection between our sacrifice and the kingdom's progress. But I will warn you, when God uses you, when you allow God to arrest all of your life, it will always come with a personal cost, guys. When you take the step of faith to follow Jesus, you will pay a price greater than you could possibly imagine. I will warn you, you will experience loneliness, rejection, fear, doubt, heartache, occasional bouts with discouragement. People may judge you. They may laugh at you, misunderstand you, sometimes even work against you. But when your faithfulness impacts another life and glorifies God, when your faithfulness brings the kingdom to earth, you will never think about any price that you paid. God will be honored. the kingdom of kingdom of heaven will come to earth. And if it be his will, lives will be transformed. Let's pray. Father, you are good. You are great. You are kind and you are loving. Thank you for bringing us through this time of disruption. Thank you for disrupting our regularly scheduled program, but not just like thrusting these things upon us, but Lord, you are coming to us in care as the good shepherd. You are calling us into a life with you. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your grace as we live this out, because we all know that we're going to struggle with this. It's not going to become perfect after this moment, Jesus. So thank you for your grace. God, I pray that because of this morning, we will feel empowered by your Spirit to step out into this city and to see your kingdom come to earth, and we will recognize the cost, but we won't care. Because we are your joy. We love you, Lord. You know our hearts. In your holy, holy, holy heavenly name we pray. Amen.